Our our topic for today's book club is conflict and competition. And as we're kind of getting warmed up a little bit, I wanted to invite people to think about competition, not thinking about the kids right now, but for us as adults. What do you see as the value of competition in the lives of adults? Is competition good for us? Just kind of your thoughts. You can type in the chat or you can unmute. What do you think about competition?
I think it's necessary. I think it's good. To point, I mean, I think you need to be competitive. You need to learn to be competitive. I mean, if you're going to get anywhere, and you have to have something that, set your goals high enough that you can achieve them and try to push yourself. Otherwise, I don't know. For some people, though, competition, they thrive and move with competition, and others, it's just stifling, or really freeze, freezes them up. They can't handle competition. So I don't know. I think it depends on the individual and how you're brought up. If you had some of that opportunity to be competitive, as you're younger, or if your family's competitive, I think it depends on how you're raised.
And one of my thoughts when I consider this question is, when we think about competition in a market-based economy, at least all of the economic stuff says that competition is good, that it pushes businesses to try new things, that they improve more when they have competition. That's why it used to be that there was always a Burger King across the street from a McDonald's, because both businesses did better when they were located near each other and they had that competition to thrive on.
And now McDonald's has opened up a new type of venue in Chicago. So something Mac. It's called something Mac. It's a big secret.
Oh.
It's something Mac, and it's going to be open soon. Shareholders meeting tomorrow. It's going to be announced. So yeah, competition within themselves. How come no one else is saying anything about competition?
I have complicated thoughts around it. I for some, as an adult, like I know people who thrive in competitive situations. Like that is the thing that motivates them. They really enjoy it. And I know other adults who what have you said, right? Like it shuts them down. Like it makes, and I will admit I am actually one of those adults. I don't enjoy competitions. I feel like I don't even like escape rooms, because that like sense of urgency stresses me out. And I'm like, you know what? There's enough stress in my life. I do not need to like add to this. Like I enjoy, but I think, and I'm wondering maybe if like clarifying what a competition is, like, because I think there's different conceptions of like what it is. Like it could be just I mean, because like, okay, so like I just for the second year in a row, I just signed up for a puzzle competition, which is a weird competition, but like there's a bunch of people, we're in teams of 2 or 4, and we sit in a room and we all start on the same puzzle at the same time, and whoever finishes first get a prize. But really, I just enjoy puzzling, and I have a friend that we like to do it together, and we're both really fast. So like that, but like I don't really care if I win. Like that does not motivate me. I just like doing it. Like it's the activity. And so I wonder, I think a lot about how, like, is it the competition that's the motivating part? Is it the doing the thing that's the motivating part? Like what is the like nuance inside the idea of competition that's really motivating people and motivating different people? So I don't know. It's complicated. I don't have a clear answer on it.
Well, I put my answer in the chat, Lorna, but I can add a little bit. I think that it's a healthy way to learn about managing loss. But to speak a little bit to what Becky was talking about, you need to make sure you have the right amount of competition, the right amount of stress, right? It goes to, I think, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, right? How we don't want to, it's a learning theory about how, like, with students, we want to give them enough struggle, but not too much. and not too little, right? If we give someone no struggle at all, which is no competition, there's not going to be any growing or development. But if we give way too much competition, for example, the first time when I was dating my wife, we played board games, and I played a game with her that I really enjoyed, and a roommate, and I totally destroyed them. There was no hope, no competition. Since then, and I've been married for 13 years now, since then, I have played that game twice in my life, right? There's a reason for that. There was too much competition. She has no desire, like her desire to even try that. It was too much. It was too much stress, too much, like no hope, right? So we have to have that sweet spot when we're talking about competition too, I think. Not just like, okay, high school varsity player versus a freshman or like a senior varsity player versus a freshman non-athletic person, right? That's not good competition. That's not healthy competition, because the freshman will sit down and be like, whatever, I don't care anymore, right? So I think that, go ahead.
I want to hold on to that idea, Brian, because we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the discussion.
And I'd like to say too that your comments are like, yeah, I always tell the kiddos that are in 4-H or whatever, said, you learn more from a red and a white ribbon than you do from a blue or a purple ribbon. And honestly, when I was doing a lot of judging and stuff and working with 4-H youth, it's like, we got to quit schmoozing them. You know what I mean? They don't know how to lose, and they don't know how, like, you got a red ribbon because you didn't meet this standard. You know what I mean? You didn't meet this standard, and it's okay. It's okay to get a red ribbon or a white ribbon. Oh, you didn't even follow the rules in the rule book at all. This doesn't even fit in, whatever. And you explain to them why. Because our students, I don't think, have very much resiliency. They don't learn how to be resilient. They don't know how to handle loss, and some of them don't even know how to handle winning, and they don't care. That's the thing that concerns me, is I don't want to try to be really good at something. A lot of students don't want to try to figure out what they can excel at and try to be really good at something by working at it, and practicing and practicing. That's like practicing your math facts. You're not going to be good at math if you don't learn and practice your math facts. You're not going to be good at dribbling the basketball if you don't practice it, but they don't even want to try. So that's what's more concerning to me, is they don't want to try to get better at stuff. A lot of students, and that's very concerning to me. I know one thing, when our sons were playing competitive basketball AAU, it's like, no, you need to go to Louisville and play against the best of the best, because you need to see as a freshman how good you have to be to compete at this level. You need to get your rear end waxed, to see how you might be good in Shannon, Nebraska, but you're not good out there in the big picture of things. You need to work on this and that. And that's why we took them other places and gave them the opportunity to go play at bigger and better places, because they could see how much better people are in other parts of the country. We're just so isolated here, I don't know. So
I wonder, Lorna, when I think about that, like, I think you're spot on there when you say, like, we have seen a decrease in the drive to be great at something through work and effort. But I wonder how much that's entangled with fear of failure, like of trying and not being good. And I mean, we talk about this in engineering all the time, right? Like just like cutting down, like there's an expectation, I think, and I will admit this, growing up in Palo Alto, right, that you're supposed to be great. And so if you don't think you're going to be good at something, you just don't even try. Like and I think that's a mentality we have. And I see that across
is that like complacency
states.
Like they're complacent kind of?
No, I think it's a fear of failure. I think it's like
avoiding the chance that you're going to fail.
Yeah,
and I will do that too. Although over Thanksgiving I did play cribbage. I mean, my eldest son's super competitive. I mean, we all are I'm very competitive. My husband's not, but we're very competitive. So we're playing cribbage, kind of a newer game for me, 5 years in. I haven't played a lot. My husband's an expert. I'm terrible, and I know I'm going to get beat. I'm going to get skunked, right? Mm-hmm. And if people aren't counting my cards for me and helping me, if we were playing cutthroat, I would really get skunked. But I'm just not very good at it because I haven't played very much. But I had to go into it knowing I'm sitting there spending time with my husband, my son, and his fiance, and his fiance and I are playing team, and we're gonna get beat. I had to be like okay with that, although that's hard for me. I don't like to get beat by my husband and my son, but I know I'm gonna get beat because we got terrible cards. But I was okay with that, but there was a time when it would have been it's hard for me to get, I don't like to get beat, but I always let the kids win, what I mean? I have a point where you let them win, but yet you're like, hey, you're not even trying.
I think it's like a mentality around like, and I talk about this again in engineering with kids, right? Like there's like a culture around it of like, of it being okay to try and fail and learn from the failure, and like how people respond to others failing is matters. Like it's really big. And I love how this book, right, it talks about all the time about like, like even when you like high five out, right? Like that's, and I love that. And I see this, I always try to like latch on to sports when I see them doing really positive things around just like encouraging kids to play. And it's more than like a participation trophy, but like, good job, you tried hard. And I see it like, I keep mentioning this because it's been so impactful, but my youngest kiddo, who's 12, took up Ultimate this last summer. And that is the culture. I don't know if this is true everywhere, but the culture around Ultimate here in Boulder is incredibly positive. Like they, even when they get their butts whooped, like absolutely shot down, like 7-0 in a game, the winning team is still like at every point, every good play, they're like, good job, they're like high five. And then at the end they have this thing where they all the teams sit down in a circle together, like at the end of each game, and they talk about like what were some great plays, who was the player of the game, it's like such a like, what's what I'm looking for, collaborative spirit maybe. And I even though it's a highly competitive sport, and I love that about that game. And I wonder, like that's the kind of thing I love to see, and I think is productive competition, I guess. Is like,
well, and that ties into a quote from the book that really stuck out to me on page 87. It's like it's the top paragraph. It's like the end of the paragraph from the previous page. And it says that ultimately competition should be included as part of our educational system as a means of enhancing the experience, not hindering it. And so like what you're talking about, Becky, that's enhancing the experience. It's not like making it worse. Like alternatively, I saw a random video on YouTube about a football club, like a soccer club in England. And they're like, okay, guys, our cheers are getting, it's a comedy sketch. It's about our cheers are getting too overly, like we're getting too insulting, like yes, to tease the other team, but like, and it's like, it's the complete opposite side of like this toxic competition. And they're joking about this toxic competition versus this, what you're talking about, Becky, this really supportive competition. And like, is competition enhancing or hindering our experience? Personally, I am not a fan of letting my kids win. I do not let them win, but I do make sure that the game is close, which is a lot harder for me because I have to count my points really carefully. And so I want them to have the hope of winning, but they have to earn it. So
that takes like so much work, but yes, I'm with you on that one.
I enjoy it actually a lot because it's a lot harder for me to do instead of just like do the best play. Okay, what's the barely?
You're talking about zone of proximal development for you, right? Like you are put yourself in your zone while putting them in their zone too. So well played.
I love actually pushing myself. It's a competition with myself. How close can I make this score without letting them win? Kind of thing.
I love that. That's so cool.
I think that we'll come back to some of the ideas in this discussion because we're going to be talking a little bit more about conflict and competition and how those are an important part of play. And I think one of the things that struck me is we sometimes think about conflict as competition as being problems that we want to not have on the playground, that we want to avoid having too much conflict or competition on the playground. But at the same time, as adults, they're an integral part of our life. Conflict and competition is part of the environment where we live and work. And especially I'm thinking about work, that there are times when you are competing with others or within your organization or with another organization. There's always conflict when you have people close together. So that's something to think about too. And I think that's one of the things that PlayWorks is advocating, that children are going to have to face these things as adults, so they should have opportunities to prepare them as children. But, you know, we look for competition. We try to set up our business environment so that there is competition. So I don't think we should completely shut it out either. Anyway, we'll come back to that. I did want to just do for the recording a couple of highlights from our last session so that we can kind of remember where we were at. The last session, we talked a lot about social norms and how we can instill positive norms in how we set up the environments in after-school programs and how we play. We talked about trying to set up experiences where youth develop the skills to be leaders, to be inclusive of others, and how to watch for examples of those positive behaviors and reinforce them. That's one of the important strategies that Playworks uses a lot, is reinforcing the positive behaviors that they want to see in play, and really recognizing those and lifting those up as examples where you get attention for being inclusive, for being a good leader. In today's session, we're going to talk about power and limitations that play has in helping children manage conflict, manage emotions. And in the last section, there's a little bit about combating obesity too, and the power of play in these areas. I always like to start with sharing my favorite story from the section because I can, because I get the microphone first. And so I loved the story that's on page 78, 79. This is Sean is the Playworks play coordinator at a school in New Orleans. This is the one where they have lots of wooden walkways because they're recovering from the hurricane. And so it's not easy to get from one place to another on the playground necessarily. And one of the things I love about it is I've had this experience. There's kind of a burst of adrenaline you get when you think something dangerous is about to happen on the other end of the playground, and you want to be able to get there and intervene before anybody gets hurt. And that's kind of, I can tell in how the story is that sense that Sean thinks something is happening and he wants to get there, but it's really hard because of the where their play area is set up to get where they want to go. And I've had that. It's just a little rush of adrenaline when you feel like you got to get there. So I could really relate to that. And also, I'm sure that he was concerned Mohammed is the junior coach or helper that is in the middle of this situation that he thinks might be a fight. And I haven't had a lot of experience with fights on the playground, but I have had more in my own neighborhood, where we're about a block away from the park and the school. So if there's a conflict that starts over at the school and is going to come to actual physical altercation, it kind of ends up over in our neighborhood because we're far enough away. So I've had to intervene in a couple of instances. It's kind of scary. So all of that kind of went through my head in my own personal experiences. And then in the story, he gets there and discovers that the kids are having a conflict. There is an argument going on, but he's already given them the tools to settle that conflict without any argument. So they're playing rock, paper, scissors to settle their argument. And all of the loud noises and oohs and ahs that he's hearing was not because the kids were starting to fight each other, but because everybody was both sides were throwing rock repeatedly, and they were all in awe of how that works. So I love that sense that there are things that can happen in when children are loosely supervised on a playground, because that to be successful, children need loose supervision on the playground. If they're too supervised, they don't have opportunities to develop the skills we're talking about. So you do have the risk that there's going to be conflict, that there might be fisticuffs or pushing or at least some pretty serious name calling. But to see that they had the tools in order to settle that is something that I really liked. And we're going to talk about what are the things we can do to set up kids, to give them tools like that so that they are prepared when they face that sort of conflict. That was my long setup for today. Anything else that you noticed in particular in this section that you thought was worth highlighting for the group? I wonder, and Lorna, we may have to rely on you and Brian for this. Do you have examples from your own work where students have been able to resolve conflicts on their own? What are the strategies that you've seen kids using in your program? I know, Brian, you work with your kids after school program sometimes. Have you seen them resolving conflict?
I actually like the Rochambeau example that they gave here because that has been my go-to for the longest time forever, like in my classroom and in after school. And so sometimes later in the year, I find that they just do it themselves because they know if they call me over, I'll be like, all right, rock, paper, scissors. Like, I wanted the green marker. I wanted the green marker. Well, we only have one, rock, paper, scissors, right? And like, they'll sometimes just do it. And they're like, all right, cool. Like, they're fine with it. They move on, and sometimes there's a kid who has more of an issue, but then that's a different emotional like distress, probably from something else that happened earlier that, we can address. But rock, paper, scissors is always my go-to. And it's so familiar for kids. I think that's why this worked for this one. It's like, all right, rock, paper, scissors. Like, okay.
And I think I can't think of anything top of my head with older kids, like the 5th or 8th graders, but I'm thinking with younger kids, like the 3rd and 4th graders, when it's just a little thing like that, it's like, if they hurt somebody's feelings, there's always so many people that have their feelings hurt. It's like, oh, really? And they come to you and they tell you, oh, so-and-so, and you're just like, oh, I said, do you have an iMessage? Have them do an iMessage. It's something we did a lot of years ago, is the iMessages. I don't know that the administration and teachers are using it such anymore, but I mean, they do, but they maybe call it something different. I'm just like, did you have an iMessage? Do you guys talk it out? Like, there's nothing to solve except you had hurt each other's feelings. So, have that iMessage back and forth, really look at each other, talk to each other, think, this shouldn't happen again. I don't know if that's a good example or not, but that's the one thing I could think of top of my head. And that would be more like the 3rd and 4th graders, that grade level, are pretty good at that.
Well, and I like that you're giving them, you're not just saying talk it out, you're giving them a strategy that they can use to do it. And that's exactly what the Rochambeau is too. I think that's important, that we give them strategies that they can practice and use. One of the other questions I had about this section, there's a lot. Okay, I have to admit, I love this. Growing up in Nebraska, my husband is from Ogallala, which is a huge volleyball community. The whole section about volleyball and not being competitive and nobody knowing how to play volleyball was hilarious. Because that is
not in Nebraska.
Not my experience in Nebraska.
But like in California where I grew up, nobody played volleyball. Like, that was not a thing.
Well,
I know. I was watching Stanford, the Cardinal, play in the NCAA tournament. I'm like, what do I do? Have to go to Stanford? I've been to Palo Alto and visited, but I'm like, there's nobody in the stands. I'm like, are you kidding me? They have the fabulous volleyball team and there's nobody in the stands.
Nobody cares about Stanford volleyball. It's tragic. Like, they're so good.
They're so good.
I have learned to appreciate them since working for Nebraska.
We talked earlier about badminton. Becky was a varsity badminton player. And I think that would be a great example if you wanted to have a sport like how they're talking about volleyball, badminton would be a great one. I remember that we did a badminton unit in middle school, but even at the end, none of us
Right, but
really
like who
understood
plays
how to play.
badminton? Yeah, yep, that is a good example, Sandra. Like who play? Everyone's bad at it at the beginning.
So much
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, and I think
So
that
fun.
is part of what they said.
That's fun.
Everyone's bad at it to start with. Everybody gets better. Some people get better faster, but everybody's bad to start with.
Actually, I find ultimates that way too. It's been we've started just doing pickup games in the neighborhood for literally whatever kid wanders by. Like, yeah, sure, come play with us. Or like sometimes we have like adults who are out running who just like stop and play with us, which kind of cracks me up. Like, yeah, sure, come join us. Like, we don't care who you are. Come play with us, and you can add as many people or as few people to it, right? Like, it doesn't matter. And I've loved that about that because literally everyone sort of starts at the beginning. I think that's great. That was really funny though. I remember that. I read that and laughed too.
So one of the questions I had with that section is whether any of our after school programs are using sports. So I was talking to a group of people from Lincoln CLC, and they did start a CLC basketball league. And they're playing other CLC programs in their internal basketball league. And I love that idea because a lot of the kids, I grew up, I didn't grow up, my son grew up as a real big YMCA youth sports teams player, and he played baseball and basketball and soccer with YMCA leagues. But there were a lot of kids that didn't have the level of support that it takes to play, at least here in Lincoln and YMCA leagues. You need to have a family that will get you to practice. Practice is at a different time than the game, so it's 2 or 3 days a week that they have to be willing to get you there. There's a pretty hefty fee to sign up for the sports teams, and a lot of the CLCs have a discounted rate for kids to join the YMCA soccer league. They can join for less money, but they're still traveling to where your practice is, relying on volunteer coaches. So you have to, it's a lot for families. So Lorna, is that anything that you've done? You know, you're kind of remote in Chadron, right? You wouldn't have anybody to play with.
Right. We don't play each other within, unless it's just within the school, because you only have one third and fourth grade building, one K5. So we would play, like they'll have a basketball camp or a baseball camp and they play that week. They'll just play amongst themselves, or flag football this fall. I know they played flag football, and this couple of Chadron State College players came over a time or two
that's
to
fun.
play with them. You know what I mean? And we have a former player on staff, so that had that connection, but we don't have enough children to play within. But we do support, our kids have started their Chadron Community Rec basketball leagues. So we're very supportive of that. We realize that they're practicing, you see them, they come into the school like when we get done. So we're done at 6, and sometimes those practices start shortly after that in the schools that we're in. So we see them coming and going and encourage them. I see them at the college, a physical activity center. Like last night I was up there working out, and they're all a lot of them are practicing. So you support them and acknowledge them, ask them how they're doing. If I have nothing to do on a Saturday morning, I might go up and walk around the pack, and there's like 3 games going on. They think that's cool that I saw them playing, and I always ask about them, but we don't have a big enough program to play against, like we don't have another school with another team, but
yeah.
So we haven't done that just within our little groups. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And honestly, like our community rec is the gal that runs it, she's so good. She's like me, been there forever, 20 some years. The doctor's wife, she really doesn't need to be doing that, but she's really passionate about it, and as I am about this. And those kids, there's a fee, but I know if they can't afford it, it gets paid for. People make donations and it's paid for, and they get them on the teams no matter what, whether it's volleyball, basketball. I think there's flag football, tackle football, soccer.
So keeping us on track, I'm gonna have you turn to page 77, I think it is. Let me make sure that's the right page. Yeah, that's the page on group agreements. And this is one of the strategies that I wanted to be sure we kind of left with this idea of creating group agreements to what are the norms that we want to lift up about how we play together. The classroom rules is another way. Program expectations might be another thing that they're called. And one of the things that I like, as Jill, the author, was describing how they do their group agreements, is they try to keep them playful. So the don't yuck my yum is the rule. And, that's, you may not like what I like, but be respectful that people have differences of opinions. And I thought that was a fun way to present that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about group agreements, and what I'm going to do is just set a timer and give us about 4 minutes to look over the group agreements on this page and share any ideas you want to share in the chat. If there's something you've used and when you work with youth about group agreements that you might add to this list, or ideas about how to set up group agreements. That's what we're going to do. 4 minutes to think and write in the chat, and then we'll come back together to discuss it. Okay, we still have 30 seconds left, but I think it looks like most people are ready to move on to the next step. So if you haven't had a chance yet, take a minute to read what people posted in the chat. And I just want to start with, what did you notice? Do you have any positive comments to share about what people posted in the chat?
Sorry, I had one more to sneak in there.
That last one, Becky, is also really good because it's not only making sure we're helping each other, but also, like that compassion, right? It's teaching the compassion and making sure all the kids have the directions, because maybe one missed it because they were distracted by XYZ, or whatever.
I always like
I
that
really
too.
love that one.
Like, I like that too, because those kids that get done really fast, like they're really good at something, like they're really good at the art project or whatever, they get really good, then having them help the others that are struggling, ask them if they want help. I like that they've seen them do that. Hey, you're already done what I do now. Hey, go help a friend. What friend could you
Yeah,
go help? Ask
I love
somebody
that
if
one
they
too.
need some help, or helping clean up the leader, help the leader clean up or whatever. Because we all have them, those ones that are
I like
just
that too. And it was. I have to say, I really admire this person too. And he's like a kindergarten teacher, and he has such like a group mentality, and he just teaches compassion in such a lovely way. And I really loved this one of like, he's like, all my kids, he's like, I work on this all through the year, and have them like they develop this thing of like, they're looking to see if somebody else has all they need, and so like they're checking for each other rather than being so like focused on themselves. It's really lovely to watch it play out. Actually, I really enjoy being in his room.
I like those intentional efforts to teach and support compassion. I think the one you shared at the beginning, treat everyone like they matter because they do, is another really good way to do that.
There's a video of it, and it makes me cry every time I see it. Like, I actually have that captured on a video, and it is the best comment ever I've heard from a kid. Right? Treat everyone like they matter, because they do. Like, it's such an obvious statement.
I don't remember what page it was on, but that idea of respect the game, that was in our reading also, I think. Nope, I don't have it written down. But it's only fun if everyone's having fun. And that one's challenging because I think that it's not always true. There are really some kids that have fun when somebody else is not having fun. So it's not only fun when everyone is having fun, but it's more fun when everyone is having fun. But how to teach them that you can play in a way that is fun for everybody, and you will have more fun if you do that, and really helping teach compassion, not just expect it to happen, but to actively teach it and support it, I think is a really good idea.
Can I just say, I think that's extra important in the current generation of kids, because they did have those years, the COVID years, where they a lot of them, that's where like the formative years where you like learn compassion, and they just didn't have those opportunities as much as previous generations did. And so while I think it's always important and has been throughout my teaching career, I think it's extra important right now to reinforce that, both with younger kids, and then I see it in the high schoolers right now. Like, unfortunately, they're just, and I know it's like developmentally appropriate for high schoolers to be a little self-centered, but they seem extra self-centered right now. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I think it's because they missed out on some opportunities to be compassionate at a formative time in their lives. And we just need to pay attention to that and help them develop those before we push them off to college.
And
wherever they go next.
It's just because they were taken out of school. We think about a lot of things they missed was because they weren't in school. But in this case, I think they also missed out on those opportunities because all of the adults around them were very stressed and worried. And we tend to be not, as adults, we're not as good at displaying compassion actively in a way that kids can understand and model when we're stressed and worried. So when the adults around
Agree.
them are under a lot of stress, it's harder for kids to learn compassion because they don't see it. Not that their parents don't love them, they still love them, but when you're stressed, you don't express that in the same way that kids can model. So that is a big part of it too. And there's still a lot of stress in the world, a lot of things that adults are worrying about, and that impacts kids. Any other concerns? Anything that you don't like about group agreements or challenges in setting up group agreements?
Just add that at least when I have been leading groups of youth or adults actually too, one of the things I try to remember to say is like, it's okay. Like these aren't set in stone. Like if these aren't working for our group, we can revisit these. And so I think it's important to say that, and just to acknowledge that like not every set of agreements is good for every group. And so it's okay to revise for what's appropriate if something's not working, or to revisit or remind. I don't know. I always like to caveat it with that point.
And I know there's a school of thought that says group agreements are more impactful when the kids come up with the agreements and they emerge out of what the kids' expectations are. Sometimes I see that, but it's really hard for particularly young children to know what the issues they want to raise are. So I loved this set of examples of at least a good starting place for what you could do for group agreements for a class or a program or a club. Okay, if there's no more discussions on this, there's one more section I really wanted to look at together. And that's starting on page 95. We learn to take risks by playing. And one of the things that really struck me here is safety isn't the absence of risk, but the development of skills and understanding necessary for responsible risk taking. And I think that circles back to some of the things we were discussing at the beginning around competition too, that I know for a lot of the kids I've interacted with that are my son's age, and he's not a kid anymore, he's 25 now, but that instinct to avoid any opportunity to fail was really strong in a lot of them. And there were things that they missed out on because they didn't want to take risk and have that potential for failure. There were things that as parents, we really pushed him to do something that he didn't want to do because we felt like it was important for him to take that risk. Lorna, you were talking about pushing your kids to play against that team that you kind of know you're going to get wiped by, but you play anyway because that's how you learn, that's how you grow and develop. But I think that equipping children to be responsible risk takers is a real important component of preparing them for success. And I just wanted to give people a chance to think about that and share what is your experience in that area. It amazed me how much my understanding of the world is now shaped by my child's experience of the world. because his experience was so different from my experience of the world. So yeah, I know the world's just not about me and my kid, but
Is your son an
Oh.
only, Sandra?
yes,
Okay, so onlys, I'm a big thing with birth order. I have a big interest in birth order, read about birth order, and I always want to know what my college staff, what their birth order is. Like, I don't know right away, but you can tell. Like,
mhm.
sometimes when you interview them and then as you work with them, you can realize if they're an only, if they're firstborn, baby, middle, blended family, then it gets real messy. It's hard when it's messy, blended families, but it's so onlys are onlys and they're very unique. And so it's very obvious and they have very obvious traits and stuff. So it's
He
okay.
was an only and lonely. He never wanted to be an only child, but
I mean, onlys
neither I
are,
wanted to give him a sibling.
usually they're very intelligent and they're very, driven and they're very adult-like, but the onlys are onlys. I mean, and then I was working with a lady last night. She's the eldest of 12 children, and she's in her 70s, but to hear about some of her experiences, how they're going to school and stuff, it's really interesting. And like I said, she's in her 70s, but she's the oldest of 12. And so I can't even imagine that. You know what I mean? Can't even imagine having that many siblings, but it's really interesting. Birth order is super interesting to me.
One of the things, sorry, going back a little bit, that stuck out to me from that chapter was on the next page, Sandra, on 96, talks about that we need to prioritize long-term benefits of developing agency over short-term convenience when we're talking about risk. Because a lot of times it's, well, that could lead to XYZ negative experience, which means that I then have to do this and blah, 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 blah. Or like it's easier to do it this way, so we're not going to do the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas it's better, even though it's harder, it's better to do it that way, just because of the long-term benefits to the children, even though it's harder for us because of risk or whatever other reason, right? So that really stuck out to me about the convenience versus long-term benefits. Obviously time is a thing, so we have to still balance that with, sometimes it's a time thing, it's not a risk thing, right, when we're talking about convenience, and we have to be okay with that too sometimes as well.
I totally agree with you. I had that section highlighted too, because I think a lot of how we do things in out of school time, and even more so maybe in the classroom, is about keeping it convenient and orderly for adults and not necessarily for the benefit of the children, or not necessarily in a way that really maximizes their opportunities for growth and development.
I hate to say this, but this was very true when I was a teacher in California, or an educator in California. In the Bay Area, was not getting sued because the Bay Area is very litigation happy. And we got sued multiple times for things that were purely accidental. But as an organization, not me personally. And so I hate that that's part of my mindset as an educator, is that I worry about that. I worry about that as a parent with other kids over these days. I mean, honestly, like I don't live in an area that's quite as litigation happy anymore, but it's still very like a big concern. Like what is that balance of like, I don't want your parents to sue me if I let you do this as a professional. But as a parent, like it's just, I don't want to pay for any more emergency room visits. It feels selfish, but it can be so expensive if a kid gets hurt. So I get, like, I absolutely want the long-term goals, but like, oof. And so I'll say, I mean, I know personally as a parent, I'll say things to my youngest. My oldest is not very accident prone, but my youngest is. And actually I will say my youngest takes much bigger risks than my older kiddo does. And so I'll say things like, just like before, like I'll just be like, just don't break anything before we go on vacation, please. Because that's going to make things really good. Just be extra cautious right now. And I've tried to like back off on every other time and not say things like that. But like, we're leaving on a trip next week. If you break your arm, you're not going to be able to swim. Like, just think about these things, please. But I mean, she's also old enough that I can say stuff like that, but I feel like it's a different.
Yeah.
That's really hard as a professional after school. Like, how much of a risk do you let kids take? And I can see the I don't know if this happens in Nebraska as much, but I see the concern in teachers' eyes or in professionals' eyes, right? Like, my kid came home and had gotten hit in the face during Gaga Ball a couple weeks ago, and the teacher was like, "I just needed to tell you this," and like I could see them like cringing. I'm like, it's Gaga, like it happens. This is a thing that happens. Okay, like they're fine. They didn't break a nose, and even if they did, okay. Anyway, but that's
That's
me.
not like it's a baseball,
Yeah.
90 miles an hour. That's the difference. Yeah.
Right, but even then, like
I
that is a risk
almost
in
get-
playing baseball. This is why we sign away our kids.
I know, and they're so like
Lives.
at it, third or fourth grade, I think she was like hit her head back her head, and we're concerned about concussions. And so we did all that protocol, and there's parents are 45 minutes away and all the emergency contacts are 45 minutes away,
Yeah.
Oof.
but man, that's a scary one.
Mhm.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
But they're
Not
so
minimizing the scary,
klutzy.
but-
They're so klutzy and they're just not coordinated, and stuff happens and we have crappy playgrounds. I mean, you have the cushy stuff under all the playground equipment that then the rest of it is all asphalt or concrete. It's icy, it's slippery. Like you go, don't run outside when you go out the door, and then they zip around the corner and they all go
mean,
falling on their rears.
We
Like,
can't
sorry,
wrap them in bubble
told you.
wrap. Like, as much as I'd like to, they can't wrap them all in bubble wrap.
Yeah.
Right. But they have to learn. I mean, that's the thing, like, right. Like there's a certain amount of risk that kids need to have in order to understand how their bodies work and what they're capable of.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we are out of time,
Oh.
so our next session, this is important. Starting in 2024, we're switching from Tuesdays to Thursdays, just because of when other meetings are that we're scheduling around. So our next session is January 11th, and I'll send out an email. And our last two sessions, January and February, are going to be on Thursdays, same time, just a different day of the week. And we're reading pages 118 through 143. Purposeful changes and transitions is the topic. And this is another area that Playworks is really well. And I think transitions is really important to the success of after-school programs. Being able to help kids successfully make transitions. Again, it's another important life skill. And transitioning from the end of the school day to after school, maybe from snack to clubs time. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to reshare some of the links to the Playworks online game library and Recess Lab, because they have some really good resources about that. Our challenge to share for next time is to share a favorite game that's not in the game guide at the back of the book. So just trying to expand our repertoire of games a little bit beyond what is included in Playworks to try some new things. And it's going to be a little bit hard because some of my favorites that we've already talked about, like Ultimate Frisbee and Gaga Ball, are two of my favorite newer games, and they're already in there. So I'm going to have to do some looking to come up with something that's not in there.
Sandra, did you say the page numbers? I didn't hear it.
It is 118 through 143.
Thank you.
And I will be sending out an email later today with that. So we'll have all that information. All right. I don't know that I'll see everybody again before the holiday break. So have a happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully you'll have some opportunity to spend time with family, and we'll see you in the new year.
Happy holidays. See you next year.
Bye-bye.